Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see your bright, shiny faces. This is a really fascinating topic, this whole notion of stacks, and this idea that maybe we should be thinking about our digital architectures and our digital investments more as a whole rather than as a collection of little pieces. And maybe stack is a good way of doing that. I'm going to be talking mostly about digital marketing and kind of customer engagement stacks here and the relationship of DAM to that. But I want to just offer one caveat that you could apply a lot of these same concepts to your digital workplace stack as well. And it's one of the interesting use cases that we're seeing around DAM is a greater applicability for certain kind of internal knowledge management as well. But today I'm going to be talking primarily about external kind of customer engagement and marketing technology stacks. So many of you may have seen this infographic before in its various renditions from Scott Brinker, aka Chief MarTech, where he puts all the logos of all the marketing technology vendors all on a single slide. He's been doing it for 7 years now, 150 in 2011, 5,000 in 2017. At the MarTech conference 2 weeks ago, they released the 2018, and it had how many vendors on it? Anybody know? 8,000 and climbing. Now, it could be that they're just kind of catching up, and just these vendors are just making themselves aware. But clearly, there has been what he calls a Cambrian explosion of vendors. But what's interesting, too, about the survey research from 2011 to 2018 is just the number of tools in our stacks. If you're a global 5,000 company, the median in 2011, people self-reported 12 to 16 tools. Now, we've doubled that the typical global 5,000 firm has 24 to 32 different technologies in their MarTech stacks. So it seems to me this brings in a couple of different concepts that I want to talk about today. One is that to the extent that a lot of these tools need media, whether they're customer facing or not, DAM becomes really critical in this. And we need to understand DAM not just in a kind of self-contained way, but how is it going to integrate with all of these other tools. And then secondly, to the extent that much of this explosion is around dealing with all of these different channels, right? The explosion of the number of channels out there that we have to engage in also means that we need to understand DAM in a kind of a multi-channel context. So those are going to be two of the broader themes for today. But then underneath that, too, is kind of really rethinking your DAM technology partner, because I think this whole world of a broader, deeper, more complex digital engagement stack brings new demands on your DAM as well, and it might be a good time to be rethinking your technology investment there. A little bit of background about Real Story Group. Founded the firm in 2001, mostly out of frustration over what I thought was fairly mealy-mouthed analysis from other major analyst firms. Decided to work only with end users of this technology, which means that, and never consult or advise with vendors, which means that the research that we publish where we are evaluating DAM vendors and other types of vendors is known as some of the toughest in the industry. We also provide some benchmarking tools as well. You can come in and see an example of that with my colleague Jared tomorrow. One of the things we produce every year is what we call the Digital Workplace and Marketing Technology Vendor Map. So this is different technologies and the vendors that supply them drawn up as separate subway lines or tube lines. On the tube map, the light pink there is digital asset management, but you'll see there's a number of other technologies that intersect with it, including the light blue, which is web content and experience management, dark purple, which is sort of outbound email and marketing automation engagement, so on and so forth. And you can download this for free off our website. So you can see there's a center with a number of vendors that you recognize: Microsoft, Adobe, SAP, Salesforce, et cetera. And then there's this periphery of all of these different, sort of best of breed players around the outside. So now, where do you think most of the innovation is happening? In the center or in the periphery? In the periphery, of course. And so that's one of the reasons why these are highly fragmented marketplaces as well, and you have a lot of choices. And in general, choice is good, so let's celebrate that this is a big, complex map. Okay. Now, let's talk about your digital marketing and engagement stack. This is what's called a reference model. It's used a lot by enterprise architects So this is a fairly generic model. This is one that we use sometimes just really as a conversation starter with our subscribers. So it's a way of kind of documenting the as-is environment and then potentially also documenting the to-be environment. Right? So typically you've got some sort of a data layer at the bottom, and then in the middle with all those colors is kind of a content and engagement management layer, one piece of which in the purple is digital and media asset management, along with web content and experience management, marketing automation, so on and so forth. You have a number of different potential production and delivery services like e-commerce and portals and so forth, all pushing out through these major channels. So this is a pretty standard enterprise architecture document. But it has some real value here. It shows you the big picture all on one slide, right? And so if you don't have one of these or you're not aware of this, you want to go find this, right? And if possible, work with your colleagues to create it. Now note that we're not talking about vendors here or features. These are just different services and capabilities. So it shows the relationships between, and it allows us to have a common understanding of what's actually going on in our stack, right? So I'm encouraging you as DAM people not just to be totally focused on that purple box, but to really understand the big picture, right? And again, this is a generic reference model, so typically when we're working with our subscribers, we're kind of modifying this a little bit, and yours is going to look somewhat different, but at least sort of understanding at a services level, here's where all the pieces fit together, right? Now what this doesn't show is actual priorities, right? So that's a really interesting discussion too, particularly when we get to this MarTech world where you have a lot of new and experimental tools, but then there are some things that are more foundational. Sometimes we use a difference reference model. It goes by the fancy name of the MarTech Mall. And the idea here is that there are some anchors in your environment. Think of them as like anchor stores at the mall that attract, that are really important for you. You have to get those right or the mall's just not going to work. But then in between you have these kind of boutique capabilities, some of which may be experimental, some of which, if they fail or you replace them, it's not necessarily a big deal. This is going to vary from firm to firm. This one might be for a consumer products good company, may look very different if you're a media firm, for example. So I don't know whether you can see this, but the green part, we still have the food court in there because, of course, an asset manager always still has to eat. But the point here, this is a little bit what some people talk about, you know, two-speed IT as well, right? So it's, I think part of the analysis too is to be really honest with ourselves. Is our DAM really an anchor, or is it more of a kind of a boutique sort of role? And of course, as asset managers, I think, okay, it's an anchor in our architecture, but you know, maybe it's not. Maybe it's something that's more subsidiary to something else. And this is a conversation that you can have with your colleagues. Where this matters is if we go back to the other kind of reference model, is that this is a model for kind of two different types of companies. So on the left is a major advocacy organization that sends out, in Washington, D.C., sends out millions of emails every morning trying to get people to do something, right? And so the core of their digital marketing stack, really the Uber anchor, is their marketing automation platform. They have to get that right. And so that was kind of the center around which everything else rotated. In fact, their DAM needs were so light, at least at that time, they were able to fulfill them through, I know this is total heresy, by the way, they were able to fulfill them through their web content management system, right? Had a strong enough DAM, they were able to do that, right? Whereas on the right, a consumer products good company that increasingly wants to do visual type storytelling, both to distributors and customers, their DAM and MAM environment was really the core, right? It was the driver, and everything else kind of had to revolve around it. So really kind of, so the first step to sort of understanding how the pieces fit together is A, yes, the relationships among them, but also kind of the relative weight and importance of these things in your overall marketing objective. Now there's a really interesting trend that we're seeing here. And this is a little bit of techie speak, but what we're seeing in a multi-channel world is decisions and logic and data getting pushed lower in the stack. And by lower in the stack, I mean available to all the different channels and all the different systems, as opposed to building really smart silos, right? So the idea here is that in the kind of pinkish purple at the bottom, a kind of a customer data platform or a customer data warehouse where I have a single source of the truth about all of my customer data that's not bound to my DAM, it's not bound to my CMS, it's not bound to my email marketing platform. And increasingly now, these journey orchestration systems, right, where we're orchestrating the customer experience across multiple different channels and systems, or personalization engines, or testing and optimization, right, having those be separate in our stack so that we can use them across multiple different channels so that we can actually have an omni-channel experience. So there's a couple things that fall out of this. The good news is that in that multicolored engagement management area, including your digital asset management system, may not need to be as smart as it was before, because that's not where you're making decisions about customer experience. Your decisions about customer experience are being made at a kind of a lower level within your broader engagement architecture. What it does mean, though, is that the assets in that system do have to be really, really smart, right? You have to have ample metadata so that some of these automated journey orchestration systems can actually send the right images to the right person, right? Now, the other thing, and this is a little bit counter to some of the trends in the DAM industry that we would argue, is that you shouldn't use your DAM to manage enterprise data, right? Which is another way of saying your DAM should not be your data warehouse. And many of a lot of the innovations, including several of the panelists you just saw, are really kind of pushing you to say, just put everything into the DAM, right? And to me, that's just creating another silo, and it's completely counter to some of the trends that we're seeing out there. The other thing that falls out of this is, of course, vendors will fall over themselves to try to simplify your world and say, just buy everything from us, right? And this was bullshit when they said this 15 years ago and called them suites. It's still bullshit today when they call them clouds, okay? By definition, if you're saying we're going all Adobe or all Salesforce doesn't have a DAM, but you get the idea. You're saying, I'll accept something that's not going to be optimal for me just because it came from the same vendor and I'm only going to have to pay 1 invoice a month instead of 5, right? So don't be this guy, right? Now, I know that many of you have fallen victim to this the other way, where you were accepted, that you had to accept a DAM from a vendor because that vendor already was an incumbent, right? And so condolences, my friend. If there's any way we can help you in that situation, we definitely would love to do that. But also, we've sometimes seen this the other way, where DAM was the anchor in, and they said, okay, well, my DAM vendor also offers this, offers web content management, offers these sorts of things. Maybe we should just go with them too. So don't do unto your colleagues either, right? Unless you can go through a proper fit-based selection process that shows that your incumbent vendor actually is the right one to use. Okay, let's talk about the second major theme. And this is DAM in a multi-channel world. And I think the key issues, or maybe this is kind of a wish list, is to be able to shop the DAM from anywhere. I'm going to go into more detail about each one of these, but let me just introduce it now. One is to shop the DAM from anywhere. Another way of describing this is DAM as a service, right? And not every DAM vendor can do this. Also then, concurrently, to register asset usage from everywhere. To be able to support derivatives, but that in turn then implies some renewed emphasis on access control. What's implied at a technical level underneath this is that suddenly the extent to which your system is object-oriented or not, your DAM platform, suddenly becomes a big deal. So object-oriented is a techie term. It comes out of the development world, the software development world. I'm going to talk about it really more in the concept of information management and information organization. So I'm not giving it full justice here, but hopefully partial justice will suffice. So the idea is that you have an object, let's say it's a vehicle, and there are various variations or derivatives of that, which might be a motor vehicle. And then you've got a truck and an automobile, right? And then the automobile could be a sports car or limousine. Each one of those are first-class objects, but they're also, as a whole, an object itself, right? The sports car and the limousine are siblings, right? Many of you deal with this. How many of you are in multilingual asset management environments? Okay, so you have language siblings very often. So you're kind of, you may understand that concept at least. So some really key concepts here. One is derivation. So I can create kind of new versions, really child versions of that asset. But also inheritance. So they may inherit some properties from the parent, but that may be variable. Maybe I'm not going to get all the properties from the parent, and maybe I'm going to have some new ones. And then this notion of encapsulation and compounding. So encapsulation means that limousine at the very bottom is still a first-class asset. I can put controls on it, I can measure it, I can do all kinds of things, but it also is part of a bigger asset. So that's the kind of compounding things. So in the digital asset management space, this use case very often came out of catalog management, even as far as 2 decades ago. This notion that I had a catalog, but then it may have had, multiple assets in it. The reason why I bring this up is because we'll see in some of the succeeding slides that this is a really important concept if you want to do multi-channel engagement, but not all vendors are really structured to work this way. Okay. So let's talk about DAM as a service. The goal here, and none of us are here yet, but hopefully we're all working towards it. The goal here is that I can shop the DAM from anywhere. So if I'm in an email management platform, if I'm in a personalization engine, if I'm on a web content management system, I'm able to essentially bring in the DAM search engine or shopping environment as a service, right? So I'm essentially sort of hijacking the default search or asset repository, and instead I'm going shopping in the DAM from this remote system, right? So it's different from some of the traditional, sometimes API-driven approaches where I have the web content management system index all the DAM assets itself, and then I use the search engine within the CMS. No, I want to use the search engine within the DAM. Among other things, I may have some saved searches, some other logic there. I may have some rights that I want to expose in this environment, right? So this is kind of DAM as a service. Right? And not every DAM vendor can do this. And yes, this will take some work at the edge as well in your CMS platform to be able to do this. But we're finding increasingly, even among email marketing vendors, increasingly customers pushing this and the vendors being able to support this idea that, hey, we're not using our asset repository anymore. We're using the repository from your DAM, right, to get the images that we need. But then when you do that, to then register that usage back in the DAM, right? So it's a bidirectional integration. And what that gives you is where used reports. Now it's really interesting if you look at the history of physical asset management software. Software's been around for 3 decades. For 2/3 of that time, this software has had where used reports built natively in. If I've got this, tool X that's used in this product Y, iSoftware was keeping track of that and showing you because it was really important to know where this little part was being used in a broader product. In the DAM space, unfortunately, this has been somewhat of a new concept. Now, we are starting to see more and better where used reports. Here's an example from OpenText. It's kind of interesting because if you see some of the concepts here, they're related to this kind of object-oriented. Is it a sibling? Is it a parent? Is it a child? Where is it used? That sort of thing. There's other vendors like SendShare that do visualizations of how different assets are used in the relationships. I'm not a big fan of visualization. I think it demos very, very well. In real life, the screens end up being so crowded that most people end up turning this off. But conceptually, okay, the idea is good. We're keeping track of all of the different kind of relationships, right? And being able to expose that. But that implies that we've done some sort of an integration where we've registered that usage back in the DAM. So then that allows us to then reason and make some decisions. If I have to remove something, maybe I can find out all the places where it was used and then try to remove it from all of these different endpoints. Or if I have to modify it, then I can start sending messages down the chain about whether that modification should be inherited or not. So let's do a little experiment here, or just some, I guess an anecdote really, around multi-channel engagement. So we'll start out with social. We've got 5 social channels here: Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, my online video platform, in this case Vimeo, and then Snapchat or Instagram. So, okay, I produce a video, let's say. I publish it out to my online video platform. It's there. I can use it on my website. It's all good, right? But then I want to send it to Facebook, and when I do that, I want to include a particular image that I might put in the first comment. So each of those are unique assets, but also coupled together, they are also a compound asset, right? This was essentially the Facebook version of this particular, let's say it's a campaign. But then for YouTube, I want to put a different bumper at the end of that video. So I'm going to have to derive a different video, because I'm going to have a different call to action on YouTube than I did on my OVP, right? So I'm going to put a different bumper at the end of the video. So now it's still the same campaign. It's mostly the same video, but I modified the very end of it, right? So that's a child of the asset. Then on Twitter, again, I've got an image, but I need to keep my video under 2 minutes. So I do a shortened cut of it, and maybe I'm doing a square video, rather than a longer video. And then finally, like for Instagram, I might be doing an Instagram story with multiple different images, right? So these are all the same campaign, but they each have multiple different derivations of the asset. Same thing if we're going to syndication like to Roku or Apple News now, which is really popular with publishers, really interesting. Apple News wants you to have at least 2 or 3 paragraphs of description and not 1, right? So most people have this metadata field with 1 paragraph description. Now I need to have a separate metadata field. So there's a couple things going on here. One is we're seeing a lot of what we call curation at the edge, right? And a lot of this comes from a really big concept now, particularly this year in content marketing, around context getting set at the edge. So yeah, you can preset all of this stuff back in your DAM and push it forward, but we're seeing a lot more desire for people at the edge to create derivatives. And it's kind of like turns the typical creative operations management on its head, that you're doing some creative stuff at the front end, but also you're doing some creative work at the tail end as well. But the other point here is that you need to be able to support deriving not just assets, but also deriving all kinds of different sorts of metadata variations. Because remember, I need different descriptions for some of these different channels. So this requires an object-oriented platform if you want to be able to understand these both as a piece part and as a whole, right? And obviously, we're just going to need to integrate with a wider set of experience assembly platforms. So one of the things that we're advising our subscribers is when they go out and get these platforms, that one of the things they look at is, can we hijack your asset management system and insert our own into this process as a really important interoperability standard. Obviously, then, in this environment, permissions becomes a big deal. For a long time, I think permissions were kind of overkill in a lot of organizations. Now we're seeing this is really important, that if I need to let the person who manages our Facebook channel, there's certain things that she can and can't do with these assets that are going to be different from someone else, right? So permission starts to become a big deal, particularly if you allow people to derive asset variants at the edge. So what does this mean then in terms of the marketplace? Well, these are the different vendors that Real Story Group evaluates. We like to, when we do 2-dimensional charts like this of our own logo diagrams, we like to do it on a complexity spectrum. So complexity doesn't mean good versus bad. It means generally expensive, complicated, potentially rich on the left, simple, typically cheaper on the right. Generally speaking, it's the 2 boxes on the left that tend to be more object-oriented, although there's a couple of differences there. There's a couple that aren't. There's a couple in the mid-range that maybe are. This isn't an on and off button. It's a continuum. But if you are thinking about really managing multi-channel content, then you really want to be thinking about what kind of a vendor can really support a more object-oriented information model. Okay. So here's the 5 takeaways. Understand where DAM fits into your broader digital experience stack. If that stack has not been diagrammed out, work with your colleagues to do that so you understand the relative relationship and also the weight and importance of asset management relative to the other pieces. Focus on integration, bidirectional integration, where you have DAM as a service, where you can shop the DAM from these other engagement systems and also register usage. Seek out object-oriented solutions for multi-channel, but don't have the DAM vendor become your data warehouse. Now, this doesn't mean you should go out and buy a really expensive tool if you don't need it. I've been arguing for a decade and a half, you risk a greater chance of overbuying technology than underbuying it. But if you need something that complex, then you really want to make sure that you get it. And then the last one, and this is a little bit controversial, particularly in brand organizations or very brand conscious organizations, is at least anticipate the desire of this notion of edge curation, where you're actually allowing some creative work to happen at the very end of the asset cycle as opposed to just up at the beginning. This is coming. We're going to see more of it, particularly as we want to not just publish to these channels, but actually engage in these channels. And so even if as an operational model you don't support that today, and you want to pre-configure all of the different variants up front with your creative team, that's fine, but at least give yourself a chance that maybe in the future you're going to be doing more creative derivations at the end of the process as well. Obviously, that means really close attention to permissions.